Thanks for joining us today, folks. Appreciate you taking time out of your busy day. And what we're going to do is an overview on the passport manufacturing software. So depending on your needs, what you make, how you make it, there's different ways to set the software up. It's also modular. So you could start small and add what you needed as needs changed and as you grew. One of the key things with any system is being able to get the data to present itself or report or display or whatever in a meaningful fashion. All systems hold data, but if you can't see it, if you can't get to it, if you're stuck with certain ways to do things, it can be a problem. First thing here is this data lookup screen. You'll notice we have these throughout our manufacturing system, and you'll notice that some of these columns are headed in red. That means you can actually click on one of them and change your sort criteria. So you want to sort by description, you'd click on this, and then you could just start typing, and it'll get you to the closest match.
Dave, do you mind if I go back to that one real quick and add just a little bit to that? One thing in particular, with this one particular lookup, we actually turned it into more of a querying tool a couple of versions ago. So beyond just being able to find an item that you might be hunting around for, you'll notice down towards the bottom of it, there's a little checkbox that says only show items that are sold. And there's also a field where we can choose what, if you will, what type of item. Is it something we make? Is it something we buy? The idea was to tailor it to even down to the level of the individual user, where perhaps a sales user, that's all they're looking for is things that they sell during the order entry cycle. They can actually default that little checkbox to remember to stay checked and only show them stuff that they sell. Cuts down on the minutia that they're looking at when they're searching for something. In addition, say a production planner might only want to see items that they make when they're looking at it. And it's not that they can't change it, but they can set a default. So it really turns it into a true querying tool beyond just being able to find an item out of all of the items in your database. And that querying tool can kind of be tailored to the individual user. So that's all, Dave. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so next we get into displays and reports and that type of thing. Again, it's a matter of each user needing certain bits of information and needing to see it certain ways, rather than sort of wading through figuring out what they need, what they don't need. So within the manufacturing software, we have 130 to 200 different displays and reports. However, with the different ways you can display, select the criteria, print, and so on, we're pushing 1,000. So that's a lot of information, a lot of different ways to look at it. However, in the years I've been in manufacturing, which is since 95, and I think Ian's right with me there, it's inevitable that a manufacturing company is going to want to see something a certain way, or somebody in the company is, and that's fine. But how do you tackle that? Well, there's several ways. One thing that people sometimes get into asking for is custom. Do we customize software? Yes, we do. We do have some specialized, maybe a handful of customers with some things that are tailored just for them. But most of the time, it's actually done, these quote-unquote custom requests is not that. It is actually reports, data access. How do I want to see my stuff? And at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Ian and let him proceed and show you what we can do here.
Thanks, Dave. And after I go through this little section, we're going to get into the actual product itself. I do like to talk a bit about the custom data access. I'll open it up for questions before we do move on to the next section, though. Like Dave said, we do some custom work, but as he also said, typically the custom is more in the lines of custom access to information in the system. Standard report's great, but it's got way more information than you need or want, or maybe it's missing just that one particular key field, that sort of thing. So, historically data's kind of been trapped in the four walls of your server. And the idea here is opening that up, and we can do that a couple of ways. We have a proprietary database option. It's called Vision. We can do a seat-by-seat driver, determine how many seats we want to put into a location that is called the AccuX DBC driver, which opens up ODBC access. And if you're not technical, that stands for Open Database Connectivity, which simply means it allows us to get at the tables or files inside of the application to start to utilize that data in other tools. Same concept with SQL, except SQL it's not a seat-by-seat thing. We can open up access to the SQL database on any workstation we choose to without having to purchase additional seats to pull that off. So in some cases, say the owner of a company or president of a company isn't really a user of the application, but they've got certain key indicators they like to track. It's a great circumstance to allow them to access that. So basically what we're doing, as I said, we're kind of breaking down those four walls of the server, providing data access to the client, allowing them to make better use of the data. Really, it allows you to get the data your way, to be able to tailor the application without ever modifying a lick of code. And whether it's you who does it, your Passport partner that does it, us that assists, or even an outside source. If you've got somebody who's good doing this kind of stuff, you're welcome to use them. The trick is just understanding where to find the data in the tables. And we do have what's called the Data Definition Guide, which provides you with access to that information. But that lets us use simple tools that you probably already own, like Excel. You might own Microsoft Access. And one scares people, but I'm telling you, it's actually one of the most powerful tools in the Microsoft suite for this kind of application. Other outside SQL or ODBC compliant tools, this one's called iDashboard. I'm going to show you another one in a minute that does similar things where you can build executive dashboards that can be refreshed, and you can see up to the minute information each time you refresh it. The idea here is allowing you, again, to tailor the application to your individual business needs, make decisions better, faster, and more intelligently is really what it cooks back to. So I want to start for a couple seconds here. I want to mess around a little bit with some of this just to give you an idea of what we can do. Just using standard Excel, I'm going to click on the Data tab, and we're going to go hunt for data in outside sources using Microsoft Query. Again, all standard Excel stuff. If you own Excel, you've got it. Now, one thing, recently learned this, if you're running Office 365 and you want to do this kind of thing, make sure you're on Office 365 Pro. Office 365 Business does not do connected data sources and stuff like that. So I'm gonna choose database. Normally you'd have one, maybe two listed. I've got lots of different test systems. What it then does, and I'm actually attaching to our SQL version here, is it pulls the SQL database and says, hey, give me a list of available tables. And then I can choose any one or more of those tables and start to query those tables. So we're going to go after one if you're an existing Passport user, I'm sure you are familiar with, which is the customer file, which is an accounts receivable file. Now, if I wanted to grab something else, I could. So, for instance, if I wanted my salesman's name, which is not stored in the customer file, it's stored in the sales rep file, I can certainly add another table, link the two tables together, and thus use fields from either one. So you can make very complex queries here. You just got to be mindful of how you link them. I want to make sure it linked correctly. It tries to do its own sometimes, so we're going to lose this. We're going to redo it. We're going to go after our sales rep. We're going to link it to the sales rep code on this side. We do that just by dragging this one over and dropping it on the other one. So now that we've linked these, we can use data from either table in our query. So we're going to go ahead at this point. We're going to go back up to the C's in our list of field names here. Let me expand this so you can see it a little better. We're going to grab our customer number, our customer name. Maybe I want to grab my sales rep's name. So we'll grab that from this table over here so I can see who the rep is. And then from here, we're going to go back up to the top, and we're going to add in some address data. Address 1, 2, and 3, and then we'll grab our city, state, and zip. So in this example, this is something that I could potentially use for multiple things, perhaps a mail merge, as a for instance, or if I want to export my stuff and maybe import it into like Constant Contact. I could draw it into Excel and then import it into an external tool, as a for instance. But I could also do some reporting with this right here in Excel. So I'm going to grab sales current period, we'll grab sales year to date, and then sales last year. So we've actually got some data to play with in here. So at this point, I have a basic query. You see it started to build that down at the bottom for me so I could see that it was working. So I've got some information to work from, but what if I want to limit that data? I only want to see certain things. Maybe I want to see only my customers in a specific state. Well, in this case, what we might do is open up our criteria field, drop one of our one or more of our fields from our query down here into the criteria section, and then I could add a value, say California. Well, this is great. I could save this, push it back to my spreadsheet, and Each time I want to change it, though, I have to come back into my query to change it. So what if this is dynamic? It's something that changes. It's a date range, or I want to look at different states, and I don't want to have to edit the query to do that. Well, we change the game a little bit, and we say that we want to find everything that equals a specific value, right? So we're going to say enter state, close our bracket. What this does is it says, all right, well, it's trying to match anything between these brackets to a field name somewhere in the tables. If it doesn't match, it opens up a parameter for us, and it puts that text here. So we have thus built a prompt so that we can use this thing over and over again with a simple refresh and get different information each time we use it. So again, I could add additional things. If I were looking at sales history as a for instance, I might throw in my invoice date and look for all data that falls between two dates. I could make a quick and simple query to do that in addition to this if I wanted to. So it shows you some of what we can do when we start to play around with this. So we're going to drop this back. We're going to bump it down one cell, leave room for a title. We can actually title it. We'll call it sales by state. We can even take and do totals as a for instance. So now that the data is here in Excel, we've got the ability to do whatever Excel likes to allow us to do. So we're going to drop some auto sums down here. We're going to throw in a literal, we'll say totals. And then what we're going to do is highlight these three columns. We're going to format them and make them into currency columns to make them a little bit easier to read. So bing, bang, boom, we now have something that we can use over and over again. I can save it, come back later, click on data, go to, where am I at, refresh all. It's going to pop up and say enter state. So now we're going to go back after California. And you'll see it slides our totals down, recalculates our totals for us, and so on. So we've created a quick and dirty report, if you will, using actually two tables in our application to string this together. One thing I'd learned about Excel, when you bring in data from an outside data source, it brings it in a table. This area, this colored area up here is considered a table. So you can't just group and subtotal and that sort of thing like you might normally want to do if you were just entering data into Excel or copying and pasting it. So what do? Well, that's where you can introduce pivot tables. And pivot tables will allow us to draw data. This is an example I've created prior where I've got two different sets of data I pulled from different tables in the application, and then I use those to create pivot tables. This is a very simple one. This is one where I've actually taken and grouped my sales by item, and I sorted it from highest to lowest, and then I actually plotted it on a pie chart, quick and easy. Actually very simple to do. This is another one where I've taken my sales history, I've summarized things down, and actually this one's coming off of my items rather. I've summarized all of my items down by what we call product category, and I've determined what my total value of that inventory is. Basically, I said, okay, here's what that inventory costs me, and then in the next column, in this pivot chart or pivot table, I've had it summarize the sales value, where I've taken and calculated out the value of that inventory based off of its list price, then multiplied that off of its quantity on hand. So to the right of that, I charted it to see that, this is where I'm at as far as how much I'm sitting on in dollars and what that's worth to me to sell, at least at list, the way I created this. The idea is we can really start to go after information in our database and allow our database to start working for us. I can refresh any of these things whenever I want, get the latest and greatest information in here. And you'll see I just copied and pasted these into a master sheet, I call it my dashboard if you'd like, where I've taken my charts that I wanted to have and put them in. So when I refresh this stuff, I'll have the latest information all on one screen, so I don't have to go through each one individually. So again, quick and dirty way to create a dashboard, right? Grabbing data from the application and then utilizing that to just leverage standard Excel tools to let us take advantage of it. A couple more things real quick. Then I'm going to open up for questions before we get into the application itself. This is Microsoft Access, and generally if I do something for a user, this is how I present it. So, because a lot of users are intimidated by Access, and it's a shame because it's such a powerful tool, and it's really not that complicated to use it as a report writer, but there's a lot you can do with it. So I tend to hide the database, and when they open it, I present a form with a bunch of buttons on it that tell them what it is that they can do. And those buttons allow them to invoke, say, a report. just a little quick and dirty one I did for an actual user of ours who turns orders over 24 to 48 hours. Anything longer than that is way too long for them. They make gaskets. Their material planning needs were very simple. They didn't lend themselves well to a traditional MRP because it's so immediate. So we created something for them that leveraged the data in the application and gave them exactly what they needed with the click of a button. Organized it just the way they wanted it. A similar type of thing, presenting the same query the same way, but embedding a sub-query, if you will, into it, where they could actually drill in and see where they source their products from. So anything that's purchased, if it has a what we call an item source, it'll list that source for us down below. So just some examples of what we can do with data. Last one in here, you can also create views, or it's just a form. That's all it is. I did this as a lookup for a user. They did not want to allow access to the vendor file. Roger was a very seasoned user and was not very computer friendly, so they did not want him having read-write access to the vendor. So we created a real simple lookup for him and taught him how to use it so that he had access to what he needed and we could really control his access. And then built in the ability for him to get other information with a click of a button while he was on the phone with the vendor. So some of the ways you can start to tailor the application to your needs. Last one, this is a true dashboard tool. I mentioned earlier I was going to, there was another one I could show you. This is actually, the desktop version anyway, is a free tool available that will connect to the SQL version of our product. It's provided by Microsoft. It's called Power BI. There are for pay versions. The for pay versions are way more powerful, though even the free version is an extremely powerful tool that will allow you to create some basic dashboard tools. This is common, as I mentioned, for like the president of the company who's got key indicators that he or she wants to track. This can allow them to do just that and be able to see those in a nice graphical presentation. And I've actually got multiple what they call reports in here, or tabs, where I can see different things. This one's sales this year over last for my top 5 customers. Where do we sell? I actually plot out sales on a map by state and then by city, so you can see where we're actually selling product, and so on. You can do so much with this stuff, but the idea is to provide quick and easy access any number of different ways that you may want to see it, so that you can, again, tailor the application to the point where you can get the information you need when you need it, and get it the way you want it. There's also an ad hoc query tool built into the application that you can purchase if you're using the SQL version, called Passport Query Builder. Allows you to do some of the kind of stuff I did in Excel, and then some other things on top of that, and to kind of do it on the fly from the application itself. That is an additional tool that's available. So, it gives you an idea of how we can start to dig into the application and start to really leverage that data in a manner that we want to leverage it, rather than the way some pinhead like me sat down and decided was the way you might want to have it. Because we're trying to please the masses. We can't necessarily please everybody's individual whim in a canned report. So with that said, before I get into the application itself, I've opened up the lines. Does anybody have any questions to this point? So before we get out of PowerPoint, one last thing I want to roll through here is a little data flow chart real quick, just to give you an understanding of how things are going to flow through the manufacturing or production side of the system. Everything we do centers on inventory, okay? Everything we do is flowing in and out of inventory. Now, some job shops, people who consider themselves a true job shop, they just, I don't want to track inventory. If you don't want to track inventory and you're not open to at least having a conversation about it, it's probably not for you, because we are pretty inventory centric in so much as, we're building items. We're not just, ad hoc stuff. We have an item that has a bill. That bill drives what we're going to do with it. So we buy things, right? We're moving those things into inventory through a receiving transaction. We make things on a shop order. We consume raw materials in the process of making something else. That something else goes into stock. Basically, we're taking raw materials out of inventory, adding value to them in the form of labor and overhead, putting them back into stock as something new. Now that doesn't, I show a single level bill here graphically. It could be an indented structure. You get down to 30 levels, and if you're going beyond like 7 or 8, you're doing something wrong, and I can even tell you what you're doing wrong. But the idea here is it's a very simple flow, right? And we end it with customer orders or sales orders. where we are consuming the finished product as we are selling them to our customers. All of that flows into our accounting modules. Our core accounting consists of accounts receivable, accounts payable, general ledger. All this data can flow in there. Now, the flow into the general ledger from inventory is an optional one. Some folks choose not to do it. They choose to have a clean cutoff at the end of the month, run a couple of reports, and then do some of their own entries. But we can directly interface to the general ledger. It's your choice as to how you want to approach it. So keep this in mind. We'll probably refer back to it as we move through the product. But everything I'm going to show you in the core system can be done inside of this model. All right, so let's get into Passport. There are a lot of modules on here. I've included the accounting modules, all the manufacturing modules. As David said, this is both modular as well as configurable. What we mean by that is within reason, we can pick and choose what modules that we want. Now, there is a core system. It consists of 4. We're going to focus largely on those today and talk a little bit about the others. But those 4 core modules are required modules. That consists of our inventory management. This is where we're going to do all of our inventory. If you're an existing Passport using inventory control, Passport user using inventory control, it will be replaced by the inventory management module. And yes, we can convert your items, we can convert your kits. This is where we're going to start to enter and maintain items. We'll do the bulk of our inventory transactions here and a whole lot of reporting and stuff I'm going to come back to in a couple of minutes. It's also one of our points, as I mentioned, an optional point of integration to the general ledger. Product definition. Inventory management represents, I like to say, the cornerstone of the system. Because as I said in that little flow chart, everything kind of flows around it or through it. Product definition kind of fleshes out the balance of the foundation. This is where we're going to create what we call product structures or bills of materials. We use the terms interchangeably. For folks that make foods or chemicals, they often get hung up on the term. Call it a recipe. It's a list of ingredients with quantities. All cooks back to the same basic thing. But we can create those here. And as I mentioned, we can do single-level bills. We can do complex indented bills. They're very simple to create in both cases. And I'll show you some examples of those. But we can also introduce what we call a routing. And a routing allows us to introduce labor and overhead to the mix. Here we can define individual production steps involved in the process of making something. And then we can calculate what it really costs us to produce it based on the standard times, be it setup times or run times associated with a given product. The costs come from what we call a work center. It's just a costing center or scheduling center. I just tell folks to think of a work center as a person or group of people capable of performing a similar task, or a machine or group of machines, again, capable of performing a similar task. So when I used to build industrial robotics, and by the way, it was 1998, Dave, we can define, when I was making robotics, we could define our different assembly departments. We had an electrical assembly, we had mechanical assembly, we had final assembly for our domestic robotics that we made, very large equipment. We also did a line of Japanese product that we imported most of the parts and assembled. We could have grouped that department into its own work center. Our machining department would have been grouped down into a few. We had 5 Bridgeports. Would have been a single work center. They're all capable of doing the same basic things at basically the same cost. We had 2 CNC machines. Again, 1 work center. Same basic machines, a lathe and so on. So you kind of get the idea. Now each work center will have its own setup rate and its own runtime rate, so that we can actually calculate what we think it costs us to produce things when we create our routings. And again, I'll come back. We'll look at an example of a product in a bit. All of that information is utilized for calculating what we think it costs us to make something. We push all that information back here into inventory management through a roll-up process. So if we were to look at, pick this one. We're to look at this item. Okay, this is how we make them wagons in this company. This is actually a subassembly of multiple finished goods. But in this case, it's a wagon body in red. And if we go look at its cost and engineering tab, we'll see that we have our cost breakdown. We have total material cost, total outside cost, total labor cost, total burden cost, for a total unit cost of $16 and change. And that's our totals. Over here on a manufactured product, we should never see material cost. We should only see labor, burden, and occasionally outside processing costs. All the rest of it comes from the lower levels of the bill. So this is the total cost of this, and this was created by creating over in product definition, which is accessible right here from the item, a product structure or bill of material where I said, look, here's my components, then creating a routing for it, where I said, look, I got 3 steps to make this thing. Step 1, I form the wagon body. It's a machining operation. It happens in Work Center P110. Got a quarter hour of setup time, and then I've indicated that in an hour I can punch out 150 of these things. And then I go into my paint department where I'm actually prepping this thing and priming it. I actually worked in the paint department. I hated sandblasting, I'm just saying. So we, in this case, have defined a time per piece rather than pieces per time. You can do it both ways. I don't have to know what the fractional minute is. I can enter it as minutes. It'll convert it back to the fraction for me. And then the last step, where we've indicated, again, time per piece, and no setup on this operation either. So these are the 3 steps involved in producing this thing, which allow me to go ahead and calculate what my labor is going to be. What it also sets me up to do if I want to use some of the advanced modules is shop floor scheduling. Shop floor scheduling will allow me to schedule each of these individual operations to occur in their work centers. It will allow me to pull schedules by work center or even by department above the work center. So I mentioned the machine shop. I could have a single department number for my entire machine shop and different work centers underneath that. So I can look at the work center schedule, or I could pull a schedule for the entire department if I wanted to. So over to the right, we see that we've got some boxes. If we're using shop floor control, we can set defaults for this in the control file for the product definition module. But where I can set defaults for how I want shop floor control to work with this information. How do I want to report labor? Do I just want to report quantities? Do I want to report times? I can even overlap operations, which means I can schedule 2 things to occur simultaneously. Why in the heck would I do that? Well, the robotics I used to make were being produced for the plastic injection molding industry. And it was not unusual. You'd have a work center where you have, say, 4 one-time presses. And there'd be a fellow standing there, getting them set up in the morning, getting them running, and then just kind of monitoring them throughout the day. Well, simultaneously at one of those presses, you may have an operator sitting there with a pair of dikes in his or her hands, waiting for the robot to drop a sprue with all its parts on it onto the conveyor. They'd pick it up, think like a model, right? It would just look kind of like that. They'd pick it up, cut the parts out, set them back on the conveyor belt, drop the leftover pieces that were kind of just holding all the stuff together into a granulator bin where it would get ground up and recycled and reused. The idea there is there are 2 distinct functions that need to occur simultaneously. So you can overlap your operations and allow that to occur. There's lots of other fun things we can do if we need to get into that advanced stuff. We don't have to use that. We don't have to use shop floor control. It's really up to you, and that's the idea here. When we talk about the system being configurable, you can turn on and off certain features or configure certain features in the control file to say, hey, I want to use this, I don't want to use that, so that the application works the way you want it to work, rather than, just one way of doing things. And that's when David indicated that we can run an order through the system like 6 different ways. It's a ballpark. It's probably more than that. He was talking about a shop order, a production order. It depends on what modules we have, what your goals are, what you want to achieve, and so on. But the idea here is we have these tools. Now, I may opt not to use routings. I can do that and still incorporate labor and properly incorporate labor rather than trying to stuff it in as an item on a bill of material, which is a bad habit of folks using a distribution system. I just use a different costing method for labor where we can establish some rates here in the item master, put some basic time against it, let it calculate. We can use the routing file, which is what I was just showing you, the user method, where I literally just plug in some values, or work center rates, where we still create work centers, and then we just say, hey, look, this is the work center that we do this in, and this is the estimated time it takes us to do it. So instead of having multiple steps, it's essentially the equivalent of having 1 step, and it'll calculate the labor for us. But regardless of the choice we make, we can incorporate our labor cost as just that, because we can hit the general ledger with this information later. So when we're passing over information, we can reflect the amount of labor and overhead that we believe we put into making the various products that are sitting in stock at any point in time. Okay, a couple more things on the item master. 3 different sorting codes, and they're great because it allows us to do some fun things in reporting where I could pull, say, right from inventory, I can pull a shop floor schedule. It's a very basic schedule. It's not like shop floor control where I've got individual operations, but it's a nice basic schedule. It says, look, these are your shop orders. and this is when you need to start them or when they're due to be completed. You can pull the schedules by item, due date, or start date, and each one of those allows you to key off of a particular type code if you want. So that type code will allow us to potentially group things by, if I have particular product line assembly runs, I could pull it out for just one of them and give them their schedules and pull another one for somebody else and give them theirs and so on. It also is utilized on most of your inventory-based reports as an optional grouping or sorting code. So you could group a planning report by item type code as for instance. We have a basic material planning capability built into the inventory module, and one of the ways it can be run is by type code. And that makes sense if we logically group things, because if I'm placing, say, a hardware order and I buy most of my hardware from McMaster Carr, well, go ahead and just pull the list for your hardware stuff, because I got to place an order anyways. Do one order and get the rest of the stuff that I need all on the same purchase order. So just a couple of examples of how that can be utilized. We indicate, do we make it or buy it? Down here, we can establish an inventory cost category. This exists kind of above the item type code. Usually it's used for finished goods, raw materials, subassemblies, very high-level codes. It's used on a couple of our inventory costing reports. Lead time, another very important piece to the puzzle, because everything we do is date sensitive. Lead time helps us anticipate. If I need something done on this date, when should I start making it? Or when should I order it in order to be able to, when should I order this raw material in order to be able to start making this shop order, which is due to be started on this date, so that we can meet the need of a customer order, which is due to ship on that date. The idea here is we can kind of help you automate that part of the thinking process and really start to work more efficiently and start avoiding the problems that we tend to run into in these smaller manufacturing companies who don't have that kind of ability, and that is expanding inventories, because we're not real good at doing that kind of planning, so we have a tendency to order more than we need, and we have a tendency to sit on higher inventories, hoping to not run into a stock-out situation. This can help us avoid that kind of situation. Keep your inventory numbers down while still keeping our turnover on things very fast. In fact, oftentimes we can actually decrease lead times through proper planning. We can establish some things like material planning rules, safety stock levels if I'm using MRP. If I'm not using MRP, I can use a reorder level, basically just basic reorder point planning. I did below this, time to order more. So on commonly used stuff, I can set a reorder level and get flagged when it's time to order more material when I run that little material planning report. And then we can set some other rules, mins, maxes, order up to, or order multiples, that sort of thing. We look briefly at this. Sales data, just very basic. Most of the stuff's posted here from other areas. But we have a base list price here, special pricing set elsewhere, and you can assign a product category, which is the code specific to the sales of a good. So I can sort it one way for inventory reports, but then group it a different way when it comes to looking at sales-based reports. So you can really see how, as I mentioned, that foundation starts to get laid as we look at those two core modules, right? Inventory management, product definition. And at that, before I move on to the next couple of modules, I think I'm going to take a moment here. I'm going to unmute the lines briefly, see if you all have any questions before I move forward. All right, continuing on, I mentioned 4 core modules, right? There's 1, there's 2. Product purchasing is another one. We have 2 purchasing modules, one for our distribution system, one for our manufacturing system. They do similar things, but they have different goals and so on. So in this case, we're using product purchasing. It's the manufacturer's purchasing module. We're entering POs here. Doing receipts and returns, we're entering PO invoices. In other words, we're going to voucher our AP invoices here. And the reason for that is, this, as David mentioned in the beginning of the presentation, this used to be a third-party product. And I worked for the gentleman who originally designed this. I actually owned the company myself for some years after he had passed. And one of the things that we always tried to avoid doing was modifying code on the accounting side. We want to modify it because it all works and works great. So if we needed to do something, we did it here and moved the data across. So the vouchering is pretty simple. It's a little bit more detailed because what we do is we actually go through and we do line matching. In other words, as we're processing the PO invoice, we're actually comparing it to prior receipts in the actual PO itself, which is really nice because we always are doing that typically in the AP role with paper. Well, we're doing that here as well, so we can flag any potential problems as we do this. But we'll enter them, run an edit list, and then post them once we've reviewed everything and it looks good. When we post them, immediately updates accounts payable, updates the vendor, creates the AP open items, distributions to the general ledger, and on it goes. So the process is very similar. It's just doing a little bit more, and it's integrating with some things on the manufacturing side of the system. We can source items to vendors. I showed you in that little access piece I did where we reached into here to grab some source-related information. I think the item I was looking at was this one, where we had 3 sources associated with that particular item. This is where I can say, look, I buy it from them, them, and them. And here's their specific information as it relates to it. What we also do, though, is as we're doing purchase orders and receipts and stuff like that, we're tracking some performance stats in here so that we can actually pay attention to our stats. How often are these guys late? So I can pull a report or look at a display, and if I'm researching an item and trying to make a decision who should be my primary vendor or who I want to buy from this time. I have a vendor, it costs me a little bit more, but they're always on time and they have a much shorter lead time than my normal vendor. I'm maybe willing to pay a little extra to get something in to get a rush order out the door for this one run. I may have vendors that are consistently late and start to irritate me, and, well, I can talk to them about it. They can't fix it. Well, maybe I find somebody new. But it allows me to really see that information rather than relying on somebody sitting back and saying, yeah, you know what, I think those guys tend to be late. It gives me real concrete data to work from. So the sources are very helpful, though not required. I highly recommend using them, though. Very simple to set up and maintain, and they can do an awful lot for me. We do have some performance analysis reports for your vendors. I have a couple of customers that actually send them to their vendors. Everyone who does it from the outside of the system, he attached to a SQL database and pulls his performance stats, organizes them the way he wants them organized, and then sends a report to each of his vendors once a quarter. The expectation is improvement from quarter to quarter, year to year. It's basically sending them a report card saying, hey, we're paying attention. So this is our purchasing module, a very important piece of the puzzle. It allows us to track what it is we're buying, when we're buying it, when's it due, all that, because everything, as I said, is date sensitive. Last of the 4 key modules, or what we call our basic bundle, is the customer order processing module. And if you're using the distribution system, this replaces OE. The PP module replaces PO. This is where we're going to enter sales orders. We're going to do our billing here. If you're using our current OE module, your billing is very similar. The flow to the sales order entry is very similar. Different fields, some different terminology, and so forth. But the general flow is very similar. So it's a very easy transition typically for folks coming from one to the other. We do some sales analysis in here. If you're using the sales analysis module, the vast majority of it is still useful for you. Anything that relies on the AR invoice history is still useful. So a lot of the sales analysis reporting is going to still be accessible in addition to the sales analysis available here. So the idea here is we have a closed loop system that allows us to do everything we looked at in this flow chart. Where am I at? There I am. Everything we looked at in this flow chart, and then some, inside of that core system. So we can enter sales orders, process them through the system, create shop orders, manage those shop orders, produce product, take that product into stock, ship that product, make multiple assemblies, sub-assemblies, whatever. It's buy things, bring those into inventory, process those through, flow all that data into accounting. Even, as I mentioned, get at basic inventory planning reports like the inventory stock status report. I can come in here, run it. It's not a true MRP. We call it shop order MRP. This, unlike MRP, can't anticipate. But what it does do is it looks at all actual supply and demand and returns us with a list of items that require action of us within a product's lead time plus the look-ahead days, which I defined as 5 in this case. So I'm looking a work week out. So that means that I need to do something here. So as I look at these, the very first one on here says, look, I got nothing on hand. I got 100 on order. I need 101. So I'm in the hole 1 here. I'm -1 available. What do I have to do here? Well, because I've not set any rules for this, I need to order 1. If I choose to do more, that's great, but I don't have an order minimum. I don't have an order multiple, and I certainly don't have an order up to, and there is no reorder point on this one. These are those rules over here. Now, this is a very basic planning report. The third one down, this is a problem child. I look at this, I see a negative quantity on hand. That's my first flag. That's okay because I can do transactions out of order. Maybe something came in, we're in a rush, got a shop order done, did the transactions for it's out the door, and it was the following day before the receipt of the PO caught up. That's cool. It'll net itself out. Well, the problem I see is there's nothing on order. That's a problem for me, right? Because now I don't have a situation, or I'm not likely to have a situation where I had a PO. So I want to research this one and figure that out. I might leave it sit if I see a quantity on order until the next time I run this. And if I see this again, I'm probably asking questions because it may well have been overlooked. It's anything like the shop I was working in when I was doing robotics. One of the production guys saw it come off the UPS truck, grabbed it, never turned the paperwork into the receiver, and just used it, and out the door it went. So the receiver had no idea it ever came in. So those are the types of things that we can start to catch here. But one last note on this one, if I dip below my reorder level, it's going to prompt me to order something as well. So this is not nearly as sophisticated as the MRP module, but it is sophisticated enough for many small companies beginning to automate the material planning functions in their business. If you choose to, you can add the master scheduling and MRP module. It will anticipate. All you have to do is place a sales order for an item you don't have in stock. Doing that could result in the recommendation to produce all kinds of sub-assemblies, order all kinds of purchase goods, and so on, because it takes a look at the bill, it cascades down through it, it looks at inventory, it looks at what's on order and all that, and it figures out what it is we have to do to make our schedule dance. This is, again, just looking at the high-level stuff that's real. I have a shop order, because in that same scenario, all I would get out of here, the manufactured product that is placed on the sales order will show up on here as needing to be ordered if I'm inside of its lead time. So one is far more powerful, but this, again, is a very nice, handy tool. I mentioned schedules, shop schedules. I won't run them. I'll just show real quick. They're right here in the inventory module, by item, by due date, by start date. There is a ton of information available to us in here. Because we have all that information, and all that information is date sensitive, I can look up the availability of an item. So we look at that wagon body we were playing with earlier. I can see what's on hand in any of my warehouses. So 1D, separate warehouse, I got 5 there. Main, I've got 268. I can see what's allocated within my product's lead time. What's my lead time? 1 day. So I know, and by the end of the day tomorrow, based on this information, if my schedules are accurate, I've got 4,939 of these things that need to be consumed, either on sales orders or shop orders. Well, look down, and I can see it's a combination of the two. I sell that as a spare part, so I got a bunch of sales orders, and I got a bunch of shop orders that need it too. So I've got a whole bunch of allocations for this. My total allocations are a little bit more because I got stuff beyond the lead time for this item. So beyond tomorrow, I have about an additional, what's that, about 200 more I need beyond what's due in the next 24 hours. Same thing with our on order, lead time, total. We calculate an available number. It says, look, based on all that data, we have lead time available of 509, so if we're on time with everything, we're good. We're good by 509, actually. If and then our total available is a little bit less, it comes in at 250, and that's those additional allocations that we saw. So we get a lot of detail here. We also get supply orders, right? What makes up my on-order stuff? Well, here they are. It's a bunch of shop orders. If it's an item that I purchased, I'll see a bunch of purchase orders, when they're due in, and so on. So this is fantastic information for a lot of different people. We make this accessible in multiple places because we have the ability, as you saw me do when I went into the item master earlier, to drill in. If we're using the graphical user interface, to drill in and get at things. So I'm going into this customer order processing module right now, into the sales orders, and you'll see I have an options menu here. I have access to many things, up to and including inventory availability. So that's the display we were just looking at. I can look at inventory history, information related to the lot or serial number. If I'm using the lot or serial number option, I didn't mention that when I was talking earlier, but we do have that as an option. We can track lots, serial numbers, multiple locations if you want, but the ability to get other information is tremendous. I'm going to bang in a quick order here because I want to talk about a couple of different features as I do. So I just click New, starts by assigning me an order number. We can enter it as an order, which means it's going to ship at some point in time that I will define. We can enter it as an invoice, which means it's going immediately. So if I've got a product on the shelf and out the door she goes, maybe you do some counter sales, that sort of thing, we can certainly direct enter as an invoice, immediate print it, and it'll process our next invoice run. We can enter our credits, and we can also enter quotes. If we enter quotes, we can later convert them to orders. Choose our customer. Example of the lookups like Dave was talking about earlier. Click to resort. Start typing. Brings you the first closest match. Double click on it. It's an element business. When I use a lookup for the ship tos, I can go ahead and grab a different ship to address if need be. What's my PO number? Well, that's important to us. The PO number is something that we can key off of in a couple of places. So when a customer calls and says, "Hey, what's the status of this order? Is it shipped yet?" They never know your order number. They tend to know their PO number. I don't always know that either, but if they know one or the other, it's generally going to be their PO. So putting in their purchase order is really, really important if they give you one. If not, you still got to put something here. You can go verbal. If you're going to do something like that, I always recommend, put a dash and throw a date on it, or a date and a name, or something like that. So it becomes unique. So we'll assign a PO number. One other thing I'm going to put on here is a required ship date. Now, this is just a default for the order. We can change it line by line. I'm going to say we want to ship anything I'm entering as a default for this particular order on the 29th of the month. The rest of the stuff has come over from other places, customer, for instance. I'm going to click Save. Brings me into the line item screen. We can do split schedules. This is an example of an option that we can turn on or off. If we never do this, turn it off, it'll never prompt them, so you don't have somebody accidentally doing it. It'll gray this right out for you. What's a split schedule? Customer places a blanket order, a multiple release order. Maybe we're not going to call it a blanket, but maybe it's just a multi-release order. I can check off this and say, okay, well, release 1, this item, this is how many they want and when I want to ship it. Release 2, release 3, release 4, and so on. It'll all be line 1 with different release numbers. So that's an option that can be turned on or off. So we're going to go ahead and grab an item here. We'll just type it in. Actually, you know what I'm going to do? Show you the lookup I mentioned when Dave was doing that presentation. This is an example of how we can use this to change the way we're querying our data. And I can save that as an option once I check that box by going right up to Help and just check off the My Set Save, and that's how it'll remember it for me, for my user. So it can be different for you and different for Dave. Well, I could drop this down and say, I just want to see items I make. So we can use this as a real true querying tool. In addition, you'll notice a customer item number came up. We actually have a table where we can stow customer part number cross-reference. I've got a customer that actually, the customer doesn't have their own part numbers, but they have certain items that they will sell to them, and those are the only items that they sell to them. So what they do is they actually enter their own part number again in this field. It comes up and says, hey, do you want to save that? You say yes, and boom, it's there. And the reason they do that is because when the customer's calling to place an order, they can pop up the list and see only those items that are, I'm making finger quotes here, approved. We don't stop them from selling something else, but it gives them an approved list, if you will, of items that we have cross-referenced to that customer that allows them to sell them. But I can also look it up by my customer's part number, too. If they send me in a PO with their part number and we've cross-referenced it, I can plug it right in here. It'll bring up my item for me. So there's that default date. There's the warehouse. That was automatically set for me on the first screen. I could have changed it. So we're going to put in a quantity. Now I'm going to show you a couple things real fast here, and this depends on the modules we have and what features we've got turned on or not. As we look to the right, we can see that we have a quantity on hand, a total quantity allocated, total quantity on order, and then a total quantity available. So this doesn't take into account lead time or anything. It's just looking at our lump numbers. Now there is a grayed out shortage field down here, but we haven't gotten there yet because I haven't entered a quantity. As soon as I do, so we'll put in a quantity of 10, you'll see that nothing changes over here because we're good. I'm going to change that. We got 89 available. I'm going to order 90. Now, you'll see over here, we show that we've got a total short of 1. Now, a couple of other things that happen. I've got this turned on because I have indicated that this particular company is a make-to-order company at least some of the time. You can turn this option off too. So I've indicated that I like to let them create shop orders from the sales order. So what we've done here, we've also got the MRP module in play, and I've turned on another cool option, which says, look, I want to apply my MRP rules. Let MRP do its thing right at the point of order entry. So sales doesn't have to think about it, but we can handle anything that requires us to do something right up front. So down in the lower right-hand corner, you'll see that it's automatically checked off the create shop order box for me. It's given me a recommended shop order quantity of 100 units. I'll come back to that. And a shop order due date of 8/29/19. Well, the due date came from here. The quantity, you might think, came from here, but not really. It didn't come from there either, right? Because it's only a 1. Where the heck did it come back with 100? It came back from 100 from those material planning rules we defined in the item master. I set an order minimum of 100 units for this particular item. As such, MRP would recommend I order 100 units to satisfy that total shortage of 1. Thus, because I'm letting MRP do its thing right here at the front of the process, it's come back and it's given me the quantity ordered of 100 units. Bang, bang, boom, it creates my shop order for me automatically. And I can even copy comments around. I'm going to say no. We can have 99 lines of comments, 45 characters each for items and the bills of material and the routing steps, sales order line, shop order, each shop order can have, and so on. There's a bunch of different places. So it creates a shop order, and because I'm using the manufacturing job costing module, optional module, I can also create my job cost master automatically right from here so I can cost my job. And then I can opt to post my billings to that job. So answering a few questions, bing, bang, boom, I have created a sales order line. I've created a shop order based on my MRP rules, by the way. I've created a job cost master to create it under, and then I can add comments to this particular line item if I wanted to. Again, 99 lines, 45 characters each. Copy and paste them in from another source if you'd like. And there we go. We've got our line item. Want another one? It's real quick and easy to do. We'll order 10 of those. We will save it. And no comment. No need for a shop order on that one. I wasn't short. I had plenty available. So if there's a date problem, MRP will vet that out when I do my next MRP run. It'll vet that out for me and say, hey, you got to reschedule some orders around to make this dance. So that is the sales order entry process. Done. Hit exit. It's going to bring you to the wrap-up screen. If there's anything that needs to change here, we can change it. Otherwise, we're good to go. Click Save, Exit, and we're in business. We've got an order. At this point, if I needed to, usually we'll generate these on demand, I could go ahead and print whatever sales docs I want. I want to print a sales acknowledgement, knock yourself out. Print an acknowledgement. We can go ahead and generate that in a hurry right from here. I've got custom forms turned on, so I could create an acknowledgement. If I had entered it as an invoice, it would have asked if I wanted to print it immediately. I say yes, boom, it prints my invoice. Again, product's going out the door immediately in that case. So it gives you kind of a quick look at the flow there. Again, to bill that order, I would select print, post. When I post, I update accounts receivable. We've got lots of reports and displays. The ability to look up an order. By customer PO, as I'd mentioned, put in our order number or look at it by customer and their PO number. You can find out the status. Did it ship? If it did, when? What quantities? What lines? That sort of thing. Lots of stuff going on here. Just topically, I'm going to open it up for questions one last time. I've mentioned master scheduling and MRP. This is a regenerative MRP, which means we run it periodically. It goes through and it takes all of our supply and demand, anticipates, like I said, and we can even do actual forecasting in here if we'd like, and then it calculates what it is we need to do, and we can pull reports or use displays in here to see what kind of actions are required of us to make our schedule work. Now, much more detailed and resolute, I guess would be the term, than what we saw in the inventory planning report. This tells me what to do and when to do it. I can even pull a list by vendor. So if I've got default vendors or primary vendors for parts, it'll give me a list. Hey, look, this vendor, here it is. So I can place a single PO off of that list to handle a whole bunch of needs with varying dates even by simply working that report each time I run my MRP. An extension of that, capacity planning. This can take our materials plan and convert it into an hours and dollars plan, allowing us to do manpower planning. Do I have enough resources in-house to be able to satisfy this? What's it going to cost me to execute this plan? That sort of thing. Shop floor control, I mentioned earlier. This allows us to get far more detailed schedules. Not a lot of effort, by the way. All you got to do is run what's called a release routing operations, say once a day. and then generate your schedules. Do it once a day. And then you can pull detailed shop floor schedules by department, by work center, and so on. And, by the way, we can begin introducing labor collection. And I'm going to go back to this real quick. And these guys are one of my early adopters of that. This is a long ago picture. They scan on and off a barcoded routing on the production floor. And they do this. They have this started out literally in this one department with a machine here and one behind it, back to back. And everybody was coming over here and doing that. Today they have one over here. They've got one across the room. Actually, it's right over this guy's shoulder these days. There's one back here. There's one over behind his shoulder here, and there's one in the next department behind that. They've taken some of their older equipment. That's all they do is sit there and collect data for them out on the production floor. They threw some barcode scanners on them. They're able to clock on and off of their jobs throughout the day. So we can do that, or we can enter off of timesheets. It's up to you. Either or works. But it's a really nice module because I can see specifically where we're at in the production process, what's left to be done, what's been done on an operational basis. And then the last of the 8 modules is the manufacturing job costing, and it works hand in glove with shop floor control. You don't have to have them together, but boy, I highly recommend if you're going to get one, get the other because they do so much together. You saw I told you we created a job master automatically when we created the shop order from the sales order. This is where it created it. What that means now is we are going to be collecting costs as we're issuing material or collecting labor against the job. It's going to be collecting those costs automatically for us. And we can see those costs. There's no posting back. Just go look at the open job summary or on a closed job summary, and see what it costs us to make it for real rather than what we thought it was going to. Allows us to kind of hone in on what our real costs are, and we can make adjustments to our bills or make adjustments to our routings. Similarly with shop floor control, I can look back historically. If I'm reviewing a particular product's routing because my costs are off, I can look and say, okay, well, what were the times on these things for the last 5 times I did this, and see the actual times versus what we anticipated it should have taken. So there's a whole lot going on here, and again, it can seem overwhelming, it can seem a little complex, but understand, outside of the core 4 modules, the others are optional. You don't have to have them. Those 4 core modules can help you run your business far better than you're doing now, in my opinion, if you're using even our inventory control and order entry and purchasing modules, just because they're not designed for a manufacturer. They are designed for a distributor. The intent that, basically, you're selling stuff off the shelf. If not, you're back ordering it until it shows up. When it shows up, well, then you're moving it off the shelf. It allows us to manage the actual production side of our operation in addition to basic order management, all that. And all of this flows into our financials, giving us a nice closed-loop business system. With that, I have unmuted the phones. I'm going to throw this at you, and then I'm just going to toss it open to questions, right? What can we do? We can help increase your visibility. And we just scratched the surface on a few of the things that can help you do that, but we can dramatically increase your visibility of the operational side of your business. Bring all your tasks online. Instead of doing stuff off in spreadsheets or Johnny's head out in production, bring it all online so that it's visible. Again, going back to that increasing visibility, for anybody and everybody we want it to be visible to. Improve your customer service. Turn orders over faster because we have what we need through our planning tools when we need it. We're not sitting on a 10-cent part holding up a $50,000 order going out the door. We turn that into the true exception rather than the common rule. We can dramatically improve our planning ability, be it production planning or material planning. Improve your production flow. Keep things moving. Again, coming back to having the resources we need, having the products that we need in order to make things. And, basically, if you're doing any kind of estimating, improve your overall accuracy. See your job costs if we're going to get into the job costing functions. Improve your profitability because you get even without the job costing, you get a better cost picture by building that building that routing. We've got costing reports that allow you to analyze those costs and say, whoa, is that for real? And really review and see where they're coming from. And knowing your costs up front. So many people kind of factor in labor on the general ledger side later. It's too late, man. You don't know. You don't know. You don't know what products are making you money and which products are losing you money. Building them correctly allows you to see that and allows you to see that before you ever ship a product. And it may be that they get tweaked over time because you find that your initial estimates were a little off on times or that sort of thing. But it really allows you to start to hone that stuff in.